The Houston Texans are 3 days away from the start of training camp, so today we're going to take a look at the offensive line.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Monday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers. First-time guests, do us three favors, if you will. Subscribe, like, and comment. And thank you to all of our everydayers from the Himalayas coming back to listen to Cody and myself continue to talk Texans. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy, Hickman, that's right. On the other side of the screen, Texans credential media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. Before we dive
live
into
from Las Vegas for summer
he's at Summer League. Before we get started talking Texans, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It's been a rough week here in the city of Houston. Want to start off today's episode, just rest in peace to Jacoby Jones, former Texan legend, former Texan great. Had some amazing moments here in the city of Houston. Reported passed away Sunday morning. Met Jacoby Jones once in New Orleans. So, man, rest in peace to Mr. Jones, and just prayers for his family as well. But today we're going to look at the offensive line. Cody, take it away.
Yes, sir. We're going to continue our position breakdown, looking at every single position group heading into training camp, which is Thursday. I'm pretty sure everybody is excited knowing that the Houston Texans, I don't want to say for the first time in franchise history, but this does feel like for the first time in franchise history, they literally have a shot to win the Super Bowl. And we talked about it throughout the whole entire offseason, John. You have the quarterback, you have the weapons, you have the coaching staff, you have ownership on board. Everybody is on board, and the Houston Texans will definitely make noise in 2024. But today we're going to look at the offensive line. And of course, we're going to start by grading the off-season acquisitions that Coach DeMeco Ryans and General Manager Nick Caserio did throughout this whole entire offseason. And to be honest with you guys, the offensive line is basically the same. The only person that they lost in free agency with the big guys up front was George Fant, and the only really guy that they really added was drafting Blake Fisher in the second round of the 2024 NFL draft. John, to me, I would give the Houston Texans a B- the way they went about this offensive line throughout the whole entire offseason, because to be honest with you, it wasn't much that they can do, because a lot of the players that you are dependent upon when you look at the big guys up front, Laramie Tunsil, Shaq Mason, Drew Scruggs, the return of Kenyon Green or Kendrick Green, whichever one you prefer. And of course, the biggest guy, and I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about him in the next segment, when you look at the biggest storyline of the big guys up front, Titus Howard. The one thing that I did not like about the way the Houston Texans went about making up their offensive line for this upcoming season was the departure of George Fant. And I get it. George Fant did phenomenal work for the Houston Texans. If it wasn't for him, I don't think the Texans would have had an opportunity to make that playoff run that we saw last year, because once Titus Howard went down, he stepped up and played a very important role for that offensive line, keeping the pocket as clean as possible for C.J. Stroud, creating holes for Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, and whoever else was rushing in the backfield. George Fant, and once again, he was a locker room guy that I love, by the way. We was always, arguing about who was better, Kobe, Michael Jordan, or LeBron James. He was such a fun guy in the locker room, but on the field was where he made his most important impact, man. And I just thought maybe if the price was right, you definitely want to keep an established veteran like George Fant around, just in case if something happened, because not only did we see him, have an opportunity to play right tackle, but if his name had an opportunity to be called, given the fact that Laramie Tunsil was dealing with a knee injury all throughout last season, I'm pretty sure he would have done a great job at left tackle as well.
I loved George Fant last year, and Cody, you're right. He was a locker room guy. Side note, man, it's good to see when other how can I put this, bigger guys can dress well. George Fent
Oh yeah.
was one of those swaggier guys, and I really like Houston's offensive line in terms of style and swag. But to the things that matter the most, it's kind of hard to grade this offensive line if I look at the offseason. But if I bring it into, I guess, a full perspective, I'm okay giving them a B plus. You are getting, when healthy and when at the correct position, you're getting I think, top 5 tackle duo in the NFL, right? And we've seen the matchups against the Steelers featuring T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith. We've seen the matchup against the Cleveland Browns, right? We've seen some of those matchups where premier edge rushers in the NFL has had issues getting after the quarterback, whether that's CJ, whether that was Davis Mills from the 2022 season. So I think for the offensive line unit, grading them at a B plus is just on a curve scale of banking on health, right? I think health unlocks this team offensively because, again, I'm going to always beat my chest, and when I say this, if Houston can really, and I do mean really, establish themselves as a team that can run the ball, not like the Tennessee Titans, not like, those teams that are running teams, that they are going to live and die by putting the ball in their running back's hand, right? They're not a running team, but a team that can run the ball at will when they need to. That unlocks, I think, the playbook for Bobby Slowick. And I think, again, that ultimately leads to some creativity with the offense. CJ Stroud not having to do everything, and then you're able to kind of pick your poison. But all of that can be unlocked if this team up front is healthy, right? And I think with that health brings players at the correct position. And I'm intrigued by year 2, and we'll get into the big storylines for the offensive line, but I'm intrigued by year 2 for both Juice Scruggs and whether Jared Patterson makes things interesting as well. So a B plus, man, if those guys are healthy and they can move some bodies out the way, some grown men out the way to clear running lanes for Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce and Jawar Jordan and who else will be, running the ball, you're looking at an O-line where, and credit to Laramie Tunsil, who takes it personally every time a PFF list drops and his name or this unit is not on there. They have been widely considered not a top 10 unit. I've seen lists where Laramie Tunsil is not a top 10 offensive lineman. So he takes it.
Stupid.
Right.
So stupid.
Right. And I do think for Laramie Tunsil, I'm going to say this, guys. I think that he does need an all-pro year under his belt to kind of solidify himself. And I think when you get guys at their natural, normal position in health, and he's healthier, cleaning up that knee, you're going to see a more dominant Laramie Tunsil because now he can just focus on that left side, right? But B plus for me for the offensive line. I like this unit. I like the youth. I like the veteran leadership. And I think that they got some players in that bunch that can kind of create some type of controversy during camp due to youth, due to health, and due to preference from the coaching staff. So we'll get into the biggest storylines for that offensive unit on the other side of the ball. Listen, we are now past the waiting period. This week, training camp kicks off, which means, especially for a team that plays an early preseason game, which means the season is right around the corner. Whether you want to get in on some preseason games or regular season games, Game Time is the authorized market ticket place for the NFL, and they make getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to kickoff, and with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. You can even go scoop you up some Astros tickets. Make sure you listen to the Locked On Astros podcast as well. What I like about the Game Time app, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And if you find a ticket in the same seat, same row, for less than what you're finding on Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app and take the guesswork out of buying tickets now. All you have to do is download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. So we graded the offensive line, and now we're going to look at the biggest storyline with the big guys up front. And by default, John, and this might be the biggest storyline, regardless of what goes on with the Houston Texans, is whether or not we're going to see a resurgence from Kenyon Green. That is, of course, by default, the biggest storyline.
Right.
But for me, John, I'm not looking
Absolutely.
at Kenyon Green. I'm looking at Kendrick Green, and
He's a guy that can make things interesting. Sorry to cut you off.
and no, I'm good because that's where I was going to go. He is a guy that's definitely going to make things interesting because we all remember the story. The Texans traded for him right after Kenyon Green went down. The Texans traded from him from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and everybody in Pittsburgh was celebrating to get the guy out of there. Remember, Ben Roethlisberger went on a podcast talking about his very last season. They in order to improve the offensive line, they end up drafting somebody that was playing tight end during training camp. A very weird situation that went on. So there wasn't really much to dive into Kendrick Green. However, he got here, and through the first 4 or 5 games that he played before he went down with a season-ending ACL injury, that young man, correct me if I'm wrong, John, he looked really good, and he is part of the reason why when you take a look at the plethora of injuries that demolished this offensive line throughout since I think it was Scott Quisenberry that went down during the second week of training camp last year, and it seemed like every single offensive lineman had to deal with something. Everyone. Yeah. He is one of the guys that the Texans were able to just plug and play. And in the 4 or 5 games that he played, he had a pass protection grade of 70. He did not give up a sack, gave up 1 quarterback hit and only 3 pressures. And I'm looking at a guy in Kendrick Green, who was literally on the verge of revamping his career. Now, unfortunately, went down with the season-ending knee injury. Did not have an opportunity to see him doing OTAs or mandatory minicamp. But John, from what I've been told and from what I've known, it seemed like he will be ready for the start of training camp. So even though put it like this is part of the reason why I do not want to say that Kenyon Green is going to definitely be the automatic starter going into training camp, because I still go back to looking at what Kendrick Green did in the 4 or 5 games that he played throughout his career. And I'm thinking to myself, that is going to be a position battle that people definitely need to keep their eyes on.
I 100% agree. Really quick, before I get into my biggest storyline, when we talk about this offensive line unit and grading them on a curve of being healthy, understand this, guys. Chris Strouser, I think, did an amazing job last year as the offensive line head coach, offensive line positional coach. Remember that he led a offensive line unit that started 10 different players, 2 rookie centers, right? And throughout the season, that bunch didn't surrender a sack for 3 consecutive games. That set a new franchise record streak for most games without allowing a sack. They also helped allow Devin Singletary have a career year. With that being said, they also helped, and this is under the guidance of Coach Chris Strouser. As a unit, that offensive line really helped the Texans offense generate 41 passing plays of 25 yards or more, which ranks second in the NFL, only behind the the San Francisco 49ers. If they get healthy with how he has helped coach this unit, but also in not in comparison, but with the assistance of Larry Tunsil already being good, with Titus Howard already being good, going back to right tackle, with Shaq Mason already being a good veteran, you're looking at a unit that could really shake some things up, man, because they are that good and they're that well coached by Chris Strouser. So I like both line unit position coaches.
Chris
Both Rod Wright.
Chris got you hype.
Well, you know what? I'm an offensive line guy. I love it. Especially the older I've gotten, some of the best athletes in the game is at that offensive line unit. They're asked to do a lot and they got to do a lot. But with that being said, my biggest storyline, Cody, is nowhere around it. It ain't nowhere around it. There's no way around it. If you get on 59 North, you travel over here to Atascocita. There was a young man that played football over at this high school, ended up going to Texas A&M, was drafted by the Houston Texans after they had an opportunity to draft Kyle Hamilton. They traded back and went and got Kenyon Green. That's the biggest storyline. And to your point, I do think Kendrick Green can make things interesting. I also don't think that there is a for sure answer starter at center. Remember, I just said the Texans started 2 rookie centers last year in Jared Patterson and Juice Scruggs. So I think that's going to be a very interesting camp battle. But the biggest storyline is when we talk about unlocking, it's Kenyon Green, man. Can he be a mover of men? And he's looked healthier. He's looked stronger. He's looked more NFL ready. His rookie year, he was 21 years old?
Something like that.
He was still a baby in a sense, right? Could barely buy alcohol for himself. Now he's probably Sunday Funday up now because he don't got no restrictions on his age. He got to ask for his card. But in all seriousness, I think this young man, and I'm not going to say he can be all world. I'm not going to say he can be all pro. I'm not going to say he can be a pro bowler. But I think he can be a very important piece to this offensive line unit that needs somebody to help on the other side with opening up the run game. Now, as great of a pass blocker Larry Tunsil is, I have personally had questions about the consistency in his run blocking. More so with the physicality of it. Tunsil is a very smooth guy, right? He could probably steal all our women. That's how smooth he is. But when it comes to, run blocking, at times I'm like, hey, man, a little bit more aggressiveness could have been needed here, and the play wouldn't have been made on the defender if that happened. I think Kenyon Green can be the opposite side, the left side version of Shaq Mason, can move some guys out the way, move some bodies, and then that, again, it's all about unlocking the playbook, which regardless of how we feel about this offense, especially with the additions and their quarterback, they're going to want to run that ball, man. So the storyline for me is Kenyon Green earning his spot, keeping his spot, and dominating. And then again, I think after that, it'll also be just which of those second-year linemen will secure the starter spot for the center position. And on the other side, when we come back, guys, we're going to talk about which player we believe in that offensive line unit will be on the bubble. But today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is truly the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives, right? You got Instagram, which I like to call a quick high, Instagram, whatever. But we get caught up in looking at other people's lives and not really knowing what they have going on behind the scenes. In reality, man, people have their everyday issues. And you don't want to get caught up in what everybody else has going on, because that takes away time from you getting yourself together. And I'm going to tell you what right now, therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/locked on today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on today. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Bubble for the offensive line, right, Cody? When we look at the depth chart for the Houston Texans, and let's go ahead and pull that up. When we look at that depth chart, I thought we had it on here, guys. We look at that depth chart. Interesting enough, Ladarius Henderson, also brought in by the Houston Texans this offseason via the draft. Blake Fisher, the two rookies, not necessarily worried about them. You just really want them to have a great camp for their first year in the NFL and show some promise. But when you look at bubble guys, to me, I think everybody that's not a starter, that's not a second year sophomore lineman, that's not Kendrick Green, and that's not the rookies, is on the bubble. So I'm looking at David Sharp. I'm looking at Jalen Thompson. I'm looking at Dater. I'm looking at Charlie Heck, which I'm still shocked that he's on this team. But I also believe that they found his replacement in Blake Fisher or Ladarius Henderson. One of those guys will be replacing Charlie Heck. And I'm looking at Khalil. I think all of these guys, they're going to make camp interesting, but I think that they're on a bubble right now. And I also would like to add that I can see Blake Fisher making the roster, but I also see Ladarius Henderson, if he doesn't beat out David Sharp, who has experience in the NFL, being a practice squad guy. But that's my bubble take.
Yeah, the one guy that I got on the bubble is Charlie Heck. I mean, but once again, John, he's been on the bubble ever since we started covering this team. I think he got here in 2020, and ever since 2021, he's been on the bubble. But for some reason, he is still around. Don't know why, but he is by far a guy that's on the bubble in terms of not making his 53-man roster or not making the practice squad roster. But I would say,
he ain't making the practice squad.
But what I would say in terms of being on a bubble, in terms of whether or not you're going to have an important role or not, I'm looking at Jared Patterson. And I say that because, look, I am a big Jared Patterson fan, and I still believe that he should be starting at center for this organization. Yes, I understand that they have Juice Scruggs, but in my opinion, I believe that Jared Patterson was better at center than Juice Scruggs. And he played really, really well before he went down with his season-ending broken ankle. And I just think Jared Patterson, this offensive line looked really, really well. It looked better with Patterson taking snaps at center. And, looking at this offensive line, if Juice Scruggs beat him out in training camp and he wins that starting job come week 1 of the regular season, then you're looking at a situation where Jared Patterson is not going to have an opportunity to recapture that role that he had last year unless somebody else get hurt. And John, I don't know about you, but I definitely do not want to see this offensive line go through that once again. And once again, to bring this topic back up from the last segment in terms of looking at the biggest storyline for the Houston Texans entering training camp, the return of Titus Howard. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about it. When healthy, he should be playing at right tackle. But John, I don't want to see a situation where he should be playing right tackle. I don't care what's going on at left guard, at center, at right tackle, at left tackle. I don't care what is going on. Come week 1 of the regular season, a healthy Titus Howard should be playing right tackle, plain and simple. Yeah. No more. And look, back in the day when you had to put him at left guard and all this other stuff, they didn't even have the depth. I mean, if we being honest, they ain't really have a real football team from time to time. Now you have depth at every single one of these positions across this offensive line. The return of Titus Howard should definitely be at right tackle.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that D word, pause. But depth. The depth for this offensive line this year and you got guys going into their second year, more experience. You got some vets coming back and Kendrick Green. This is the first time in a very long time. I'm kind of like, as long as the two tackles stay where they are and have a healthy season, if a body goes down, if a starter goes down, then they got guys I really feel like can step in. So whether it's Juice or Jared, if something happens and you need to replace them or whatever, I feel confident in the guy behind him. If it's Kendrick or Kenyon, the Green's off, the Green brothers, I feel confident. All right, Shaq Mason, I mean, he's a starter. I feel confident in him, but let's just say something happens with Shaq Mason, and then you have to move one of those second-year guys to right tackle, right? So I'm confident in this group simply because they got everything you want in an offensive line unit. You got two bookends, two talented, two top 10, top 12 tackles in the NFL. You got youth at the guard positions. You got the veteran presence, champion at one guard spot. And I think you really do have a good young center, whether it be one of those guys. And I like Juice at center more than Jared. Not to say that's anything towards Jared, but I like Juice more. They got it all. So, and I think that's why I gave it a B+. Like, if the offseason had a splash in it, okay, maybe bump it up to the A. But the question marks about health, if that is answered, then we have no problem here in Houston. And that be because grading this offensive line, what I believe they can be, going back to last offseason, what I believe that they could have been last year before the injuries started to happen, it's going to be an A. Thank you guys for watching and listening, tuning in to the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. It's been a rough past week, but we made it through. Cody, there's a couple of big things happening this week. Of course, Texans Training Camp kickoff. However, NCAA.
Oh, Lord.
NCAA is here.
Oh, my goodness.
Said, we're going to have a blast this week trying to get back to some normalcy.
Yes, sir. And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.